very passionate about democracy, very passionate about open government and about how we can make government more engaging, more, I guess, responsive and more representative of the citizens it is meant to represent. So when I started working for the Senator, she was on the backbench at the time, and we sort of sat back and said, okay, what are things that we can do to create examples and case studies that help sort of demonstrate that government, whether it be a department or agency or a political office or a minister's office, can better engage with the general public and can actually, can do things in sort of new and interesting ways. So what we thought we'd do is sort of have a look at, and at the time this whole Gov 2.0, and by the way, Gov 2.0 is like this term which as a technical person annoys me, but it has taken off and there's a lot of people that interchangeably use the terms open government and Gov 2.0, and I'll get to that in a second. But we sort of started to look at things that we could do in our office. So I'll sort of come to that. So we sort of looked at this whole space, this whole Gov 2.0 space, and we came to three particular pillars, three particular sections that it covers. The first one is democratising data, the second one is citizen-centric services, and the third one is participatory government. So I'll just go through those in just a little bit of detail and give you some examples of what we see them to mean. And those pillars, that definition of Gov 2.0, we've seen that adopted sort of all around the place, even in our... we actually have in Australia, I don't know if you know, but we have a declaration of open government that was signed up on in a year and a half ago, just before the last election, and that was a really great document to have the Australian government committing to and getting involved in. So when we started, we sort of looked at these three ideas and we said, okay, democratising data is all about open data. It's all about the idea that publicly funded content that's being created as a natural part of the business of what happens in government, unless there is a security reason or a privacy issue, should be publicly available. And if you have in place the processes to make it publicly available, then you start to create opportunities for innovation, opportunities for economic and social benefits. You start to make the way that government itself works more transparent, which obviously helps with trust, but also helps with people hold government to account into what it's doing. We've seen some really fascinating examples overseas that we haven't got to here yet, which things like in the UK, only quite recently, I think in the last 6 or 12 months, they actually released all of the budgeting of government departments and agencies down to £500, right? So actually itemised down to the £500 mark. Now in Australia, you're lucky if you can get at a project level what's going on, and it's quite difficult. But that they did it down to that level. They also released all of the amount of money that the public servants earned, particularly the top, I think, 100 paid public servants, which was a bit of a shock for people. And then, of course, with the top 100 public servants' pays now in the public domain, there was a lot of push for the all of the pay of ministerial officers to come out as well. But there's been lots and lots and lots of data coming out. And what happens when you start to get data being made publicly available is you start to get really interesting mashups and the opportunity for people in the public or people in businesses or organisations to actually take that data and make something new out of it. I'll give you actually a couple of examples just to sort of set the scene a little bit. But what we've started to see in Australia is the idea of open data and the idea of getting, just bear with me a second, where you live, the idea of, transparency and accountability and all that kind of stuff. That's a nice idea, and people generally subscribe to that idea. And they say, yep, that's a good idea. But then they say, how do we fund it and what's the actual value and all that kind of stuff. What we've seen happen in the last couple of years is a whole bunch of events and hackfests and developer events where data sets have been made openly available, and then people have been given incentive to actually just pizza and Coke basically to actually do 24-hour developer sort of days to come up with what they can do with the data. And what's happened is senior people in government, both at a political level and at a bureaucratic level, are suddenly going, oh wow, there's actually value in doing this. We can actually see new stuff develop. If you don't know Open Australia, you should check them out. Open Australia are a fabulous non-profit organisation in Australia. They are passionate about democracy and about transparency and access to what's happening in democracy. And what they do is they take all the Hansard data and they make it far more accessible. You can actually subscribe to what a particular politician is saying. You can actually subscribe by keyword. You can follow up on what people are doing. You can look at the most recent bills. You can look at someone's voting record. You can say, okay, well, let's look at who are my representatives if I put in 2600. and, you know, those are my reps, and then you can also go looking for your senators as well. And when you actually go through to one of them, you can actually, and this is kind of cute, you can see all the stuff that they've done recently, you can see information about the member, you can look at their register of interests, obviously, that kind of stuff. But then they do cute little things like, okay, they've spoken in 139 debates. My favourite one here is they've used 3-word alliteration phrases such as... Australia is actually, and a lot of people don't know this, has been one of the sort of top 10 or one of the close to leaders in the world for e-government stuff for years, for like 10 years, in terms of putting services online, in terms of a lot of the stuff that's been happening. Like, we're very much leaders in the world. But what's happened is sort of the first beta, if you like, of people doing e-government was just taking what they did and putting it online. So putting all of your web forms online in PDF or document formats or whatever, putting you know, the information online so people can find it and search for it. You know, it's just taking what you do now and just putting it online. Citizen-centric services is a whole next generation of trying to do things online. So rather than a citizen saying, okay, well, I want to find out information about health in my region, which level of government do I need to deal with, which department, which section of that department, which program is relevant to me, they should be able to go to one place and say, okay, well, here's my postcode, maybe I'll give you my age, you know, maybe I'll give you my, you know, you can give as much or little information as you want and get a customised information back or customised service based on the information you're happy to give it. So I should be able to go to the one place and put in 2582 for yes and say, okay, well, what are all of the grants available in my particular area of work, and across every level of government, across every department. You know, this is the dream, right? We are a long way from this right now. But the idea is to build services that are putting the citizen at the centre of the design of the service and trying to make it as seamless and simple as possible for them to get access to the information or to the service that they want. That one second. So participatory government is the third pillar. Participatory government is about engaging citizens in the vision, direction, implementation of government, which to a lot of people sounds very scary, and I think it's still going to take a little while to convince everyone throughout government that there is actually value in doing so, but that message is starting to come through loud and clear now as we're starting to see some really good successes engaging with people. So the idea isn't just to talk at people or talk with people or just, you know, have idea fests where it's like, hey, what are your ideas for what the government should do? Which, you know, you always see marijuana, you know, legalisation go to the top of the channel when you have completely undirected sort of consultations like that. But when you have a meaningful consultation where you design it in a way that people know that the outcome is going to be taken seriously and people know that the outcome is going to actually contribute to, you know, to the future, people do tend to actually engage really well. But I'll come back to that. So it's about looking at, and participatory government is also about recognising that there's value that people can contribute. So one of the things that happens with the Queensland floods, they already had a Facebook presence page already up and running when the Queensland floods hit. And they'd been doing that for 6 months. They'd been sort of experimenting, they'd been looking at policy, they'd been looking at how they could do stuff. And when the floods hit, they suddenly went from, you know, maybe 10,000 sort of followers up to sort of 1 million or so. And what they found was that they were putting out updates on what was happening on Facebook constantly. And then that was being reflected, I think, on Twitter as well. But everyone was following Facebook. So what was happening was regional radio stations were actually replaying what was, like, we're just speaking aloud onto the radio, what was being said on, like, it became the authoritative source for things immediately. To actually set up a press conference to make an announcement takes time, and, you know, an hour can mean a lot of damage if it's a matter of a bridge going out or a matter of you know, something in an emergency situation. So because they were able to put everything up straight away, not only was that great for getting the information out very, very quickly, and not just on Facebook, but you know, across radio, across media, you know, they would have their Facebook updates flashing across the bottom of the news. But then a couple of other interesting things happened. The first interesting thing that happened was people started contributing back. So someone would say, I've just driven past this bridge and it's gone down and there's a car you know, stranded there, and we can see some people on the roof. So it actually gave the police, who were the ones who were in charge of the emergency response, very, very quick and, in the vast majority of cases, quite accurate information that helped them coordinate their resources to respond to the emergency. So that's a form of crowdsourcing that a lot of people don't necessarily sort of think about, but it's a very effective and very important form of crowdsourcing. And then the third thing, sorry, the second really interesting thing that happened was the debunking of myths. So the Courier Mail in Brisbane would run a story where they said that the Queensland Police had done something wrong, or this bridge has gone down, and people have something's gone wrong, or whatever. They'd put out a story on the Facebook page of Queensland Police. They would take a screenshot of the picture. They would put it up within 10 minutes or 20 minutes or half an hour of the story being up in the Courier Mail, and they'd put it up and they'd say Mythbuster. Here's the story that's been published. Here's what the truth is. For all of your information, it's important that you know what the actual deal is. And then they would have tens of thousands of comments of people saying, "Oh, Courier Mail, what are they doing?" The Courier Mail would get 1 or 2 people or 3 people saying, stupid police, and all kinds of defamatory things, but very, very small number of people. And then the story would get pulled within a couple of hours, very quickly. But it gave the police, and this is kind of a bit of a first in a lot of ways, to actually have a government, department or agency directly competing with the news cycle, if you like, and able to actually rectify misinformation before it goes viral, like before it becomes a problem and before it creates bad decision making on the part of people who are trying to use that information or rely on that information. And to do it so effectively is really exciting. So that was really, really good. So participatory government. I guess what I'll do now is I'll jump into this process that we followed. So one of the things that we wanted to do was really give an example of this participatory government opportunity. So we designed a process that we called the public sphere, which is based on Habermas's idea of public sphere, where the government, does its job best by engaging with the public. What we did was we designed a process which is very heavily influenced by my background in technology, in online communities, and in particular in open source communities, and seeing how they work effectively. Because if there's anyone that says, "Oh, you can't possibly get constructive outcomes from online community," well, a huge amount of software has actually been developed through online communities, and they have been quite effective at it, and they've crossed every normal traditional barrier to communications you could imagine, whether it be language or belief or geographical displacement or political belief or whatever. Everything has been traversed in a really effective way, at least in the successful open source projects. Of course, you'll always have a few projects, or you'll always have small projects that are a little bit not good, but when you actually look at successful, enduring open source projects and how they herd cats to come out with really great outcomes, there's some really good lessons there. But at the end of the day, we've had people who have been in online communities for, in some cases up to 30 years, and so learning from those online communities and how we can apply that to how government engages is, pretty much what we've tried to do. So we came up with a process which at the core of the process was a belief, and this is actually key, and I'll come back to it in a second, but at the core of the process was a belief that we would get good outcomes by encouraging the public to get involved.